Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, I mean, the visual footage we've seen so far does look excellent, and the PC-specific features trailer does confirm a lot of good stuff. Ultra-wide support, FSR3 frame generation available starting day one. Again, a lot of the visuals look impressive, and we just got system requirements. And the first thing I notice in these system requirements is that this is another game where, well, first of all, it does give you a lot of details about the settings and resolutions it's targeting. All of these system requirements are given with upscaling enabled. This seems to be a trend lately, and I will do a little bit of talking about that. Are we done with native resolution gaming? Now, the first thing you probably noticed when clicking on this video is that for some reason I'm dressed as Santa Claus. I should probably address that. I considered just not saying anything about it at all. I'm filming this on Halloween. I'm publishing this video probably tomorrow, the day after Halloween. I'm a high school teacher, and on Halloween, I like to dress up as Santa Claus to annoy my students. However, then I realized, but I film my videos after work before my kids get home, and I'm dressed as Santa Claus and I have bad hat hair if I take off the hat. So you know what? Santa Claus it is. Let's thank today's sponsor. A huge thank you to today's video sponsor, World of Warships. This game is free to play on PC, and it has great looking water effects, new maps, and with new water effects and textures, over 40 unique maps. And the game does not take a monster PC in order to run, which is a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of the games we've been benchmarking recently on the channel. You get new content released every month, new ships, in-game nations, cosmetics, even ship classes. There's even been cool updates, including things like Godzilla vs. King Kong, Transformers, Popeye, Megadeth, all of that. The game also does run on consoles if you prefer, and there's multiple ship classes to choose from. You can get some of the most iconic battleships, destroyers, aircraft carriers, cruisers, submarines, all sorts of cool stuff. Follow the link, the first link in the video description or pinned comment to download the game. And during registration, you can use the promo code BRAVO to receive a huge starter pack, including 500 doubloons, 1.5 million credits, 7 days of premium account time, and a free ship. Again, it's free. Click the link in the video description or pinned comment to download and use the promo code BRAVO. All right, back to the system requirements here. So again, like I said, it does tell us the visual settings they're using, and all of them are with FSR. Now, this is an AMD-sponsored game, so one of the questions that we'd had about AMD-sponsored games recently was, are they going to also feature DLSS? What about XeSS? And I have some very good news if you look up here. Intel XeSS and NVIDIA DLSS support are confirmed. Now, I do not see anything specifically mentioning DLSS 3 frame generation, although, like I said, we do have FSR3 frame generation confirmed day one. Which is awesome. But again, hopefully if they have FSR3 frame generation, that DLSS frame generation would hopefully also be an option. Not 100% confirmed on that as far as I can tell. The game will have an in-game benchmark tool, which might make this a useful benchmark on the channel, and we will have ultra-wide support, and there will be ray tracing features including global illumination, reflections, and shadows, so you can definitely kick things up there. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at the system requirements from here. What are you gonna need? First of all, like most games we've seen recently, you are going to need an SSD. Usually games, you know, they're not gonna stop you from booting on a hard drive, but games designed for modern consoles are designed with fast SSDs in mind, so that is how they will run best. And SSD prices are really low right now, guys. If you're not running newer games, older games, sure, run them off your HDD if you still have one. If you're not running newer games off of a SSD, you probably should upgrade that, and 16 gigabytes of dual channel memory. Now, let's go ahead and talk, CPUs quickly as well, and then I think the more interesting thing will be GPUs and settings and all that. CPUs, it's looking like to run the game at 30 frames per second. At low settings, you'll need a Ryzen 5 3600 or 8700K. Now, I should probably mention, when you're looking at system requirements, 30 FPS doesn't usually mean 30 FPS. They generally give requirements for 30 FPS and 60 FPS, but usually 30 doesn't mean 30, it means it's not locking to 60. It means in more demanding scenes, you'll probably be maybe around 30. In less demanding scenes, you're probably in between 30 and 60, but you're not locking to 60, so they won't guarantee that, right? In other words, if you're worried the 3600 will just be locked to 30 FPS all the time, I doubt that's the case. And in their PC-specific features video, they did mention that they're trying to be scalable across a variety of CPU cores, including up to higher core counts. In Unreal Engine games, a lot of times we have issues scaling, taking advantage of multiple cores, but this is not an Unreal Engine 5 game. This is on the Snowdrop engine. I did look this up. So this is on Ubisoft's Snowdrop engine. This is an engine that you might remember from games such as like The Division 2, and I believe this is developed by the team behind that game, Ubisoft Massive. And this will also be the engine for Star Wars Outlaws coming up in 2024. Anyway, so that is the engine in use here. So this is not an Unreal Engine 5 game. This is an in-house Ubisoft engine. Anyway, the Ryzen 5 3600 is a 6-core 12-thread CPU from 2019. So, and I think the earlier version 3600X I think came out even before that. So not super new. Wasn't super expensive when it launched, 4 years ago. And, so it's not asking that much. An i7 8700K, also 6-core 12-thread CPU. This one from around 2017. So not asking for like a huge amount. However, these also aren't the weakest CPUs that you sometimes see on a system requirements list. So it does look like there could be some CPU grunt required here, especially if you want 60 frames per second where they're jumping up to a 5600X and an 11600K. The 5600X is actually, this is only one generation behind the current Ryzen generation. 6-core 12-thread gaming CPU came out in 2020. And the Intel version 11600K, again, 6-core 12-thread, this one from 2021. So they are asking for newer CPUs, especially to hit 60 frames per second. And it looks like if you want to jump up to their ultra settings, they're actually jumping all the way over here to a 5800X3D and a 12700K. So the CPU requirements here do look beefy. Now, could you get by with lower? Again, system requirements list, it's always kind of a big question mark. Because also sometimes they don't, I'm not convinced what they actually test, right? Are they going to test every CPU on the market? Probably not. They probably set up a variety of test systems with, mid-range CPUs from 4 or 5 years ago, mid-range CPUs from a couple of years ago, high-end CPUs from a couple of years ago. And they're probably confirming that you're getting at least 60 FPS, probably more, right? Anyway, let's talk GPUs and graphic settings. So the minimum requirement here is for 1080p low settings at 30 FPS with FSR3 quality enabled. That's a 720p internal resolution. Now let's talk about that for a second, because settings like this freaked people out on the Alan Wake 2 system requirements list. Where again, it's like 1080p low settings, 30 FPS with upscaling. Now, the big thing is that low settings nowadays sometimes look a lot better than what you kind of think of when you think of low settings. Now, I don't know what settings this is running at, but this game looks very, very good in the footage we have of it. And it's possible that newer games, again, designed with consoles in mind, might be targeting low settings as, what they'd be running in performance mode on consoles, which still, for most games, generally looks very good. So a lot of times it means there's like no potato mode, if that makes sense, where a lot of your scalability in graphic settings nowadays seems to be coming from upscaling. And again, we're seeing that in our charts here, where it seems like upscaling is sort of the default assumption that game developers assume you will be using, which, at 1080p FSR2, I'm not in love with. At higher resolutions, and especially if you're maybe using DLSS quality, again, it can actually be a very good way to get performance. But it's looking like game developers now, in most of the system requirements lists I'm seeing lately, are kind of assuming you will be upscaling, and they're hesitant to give native resolution requirements. That seems to be the way the industry is headed. Now let's look at the GPUs to get there. AMD's RX 5700 and NVIDIA's GTX 1070 and Intel's Arc A750 8GB. They're mentioning rebar on. Intel GPUs do not work well without resizable bar enabled. If you have an Intel GPU, hopefully you have a system with rebar enabled in general. Now the 5700 and the 1070 feel like a weird pairing to me. I'm gonna jump over here and I will link this in my video description. This is Tech PowerUp's GPU specs database, where you can look up your GPU, you can look up the GPUs here to see how they compare, gives you their stats. You know, this is an 8GB graphics card. But you can also see how it compares relative to other GPUs. Now, this relative performance chart is not perfect. Different games will scale differently, and sometimes if you spill over VRAM, one's actually much faster than the other. Or I also don't feel like this really takes into account ray tracing performance. Generally, this is more just straight up rasterized performance, but it usually gives you a pretty accurate ballpark figure for how GPUs compare. The 1070, if we set that as our baseline, you can now see other cards that are similar to this minimum spec, like maybe a 1660 is a bit weaker than that. We're definitely stronger than a 1650 or a 980, cards like that. The RTX 3050 is right here in this general ballpark, although sometimes I've noticed in DX12 games, the 3050 has a larger advantage than what you see in general over the older architectures. But notice that the 5600 XT is already faster than 1070 generally. And if we go up to a 5700 non-XT, according to this chart, we're seeing a 23% advantage for that GPU. And if you go up to the Intel Arc A750, that's a 41% advantage. Now, Intel Arc GPUs, I will say, their performance can vary wildly, so sometimes it can be way back there compared to some of these other GPUs. But the 5700 non-XT version they're showing here is generally stronger than a 1070, although 23% might still not be enough for them to bump it up to the next performance tier, right? 30 versus 60, because again, 30 doesn't usually mean 30. It means, this is a GPU that they tested that's going to be at these settings not giving you 60 FPS, right? I think that's really more how you should read these. And do notice that they are listing 8GB. Could you get by on less gigabytes? It doesn't specifically state. Again, that's for 1080p 30 frames per second with FSR3 quality enabled, so that's internal resolution of 720p. Now, if this is really giving you closer to like 40 to 50 FPS range, then I'm less concerned about this. If this is really a 30 FPS average, I would be more concerned. But guys, I don't think it is, because if we compare it to the 60 frames per second line that we have here, this is not generally a doubling of performance from here to here, which would be required to actually go from 30 to 60. And we're going from low settings to high settings, although still at 1080p with FSR3 quality internal resolution of 720p. So let's look at how these compare. So the high settings, 1080p FSR3 quality 60 FPS, are the 6700 XT and the 3060 Ti. These are generally actually fairly close competitors from a performance standpoint. And it does look like they're saying an 8GB card should be fine for those high settings, although it is using internal resolution, resolution scaler. Let's look at how the 1070 scales up to these GPUs. If you go ahead and do the 1070 compared to the 3060 Ti, it is a much stronger GPU. That is a 75% performance bump. But that's not enough to go from 30 to 60. You need a 100% performance bump to do that, and we're going from low settings to high settings. Now, this could indicate a couple of things. One thing it could indicate is that the 30 FPS GPUs were actually running above 30 FPS, which is what I suspect. They're probably more like, in the 40-ish range. But then also it could indicate that there's not a lot of scalability between the low settings and the high settings, which is another thing that we are seeing in a lot of games nowadays, where the normal graphic settings options don't give you a massive amount of scalability. They still look good at the lower settings, but then they don't scale up that much from there, and they rely on the resolution scaling for a lot of that performance. And that's what I'm kind of suspecting based on what we're seeing here, going from low to high with only that much of an increase in GPU demand, also going from 30 to 60. Anyway, the 6700 XT and the 3060 Ti are actually generally pretty close competitors. So that seems like a reasonable ballpark to be in. And now, how does your GPU compare to that? Well, again, look at the GPUs listed in between here, and that gives you an idea of what is in between. And I'm scrolling pretty quickly here, but the link to this chart will be in the video description. I'm gonna go ahead and set the 6700 XT as the baseline now for this, for what we're seeing here. Now, if we go up to 1440p FSR2 quality, 60 frames per second. So again, still using FSR2 quality, but we're moving up to a output resolution of 1440p. We're jumping up to the 6800 XT and the 3080. So in that case, again, we're jumping up 6700 XT up to a 6800 XT. Is generally going to be about a 42% performance boost. 6800 XT and 3080 are generally pretty close performance competitors. That would also put you in the same ballpark of an RTX 4070. The 6800 non-XT is, a little bit less than what they're saying that you would want here. So that's kind of the idea of what we're looking at there. And then going up to Ultra, they're saying Ultra settings 4K output resolution, but they're using FSR2 balanced. So they are moving to a more aggressive upscaler setting, and they're moving all the way up to a 7900 XTX and an RTX 4080. That is a big, a pretty big performance jump here. If we go, if we set our 6800 XT as our baseline, and then we go up to the 7900 XTX, we're jumping about 58% performance. Now, granted, we're going up to 4K resolution, but then we're also increasing, further using upscaling more aggressively, which makes this a little bit hard to look at. And they're putting it up against an RTX 4080, which is generally right in that same ballpark of performance when you're not using heavy-duty ray tracing. Now, that brings me to my questions that I have from here, which is, again, the game says that it will feature ray-traced global illumination, reflections, and shadows, but which of these settings, if any, are actually using those? I was curious about this, and as I researched this, I did find this video from SkillUp that just came out yesterday, and where he first of all mentions that he got to demo the game hands-on on PC, did not say what hardware was being used or what graphics settings were being used. Did mention that would occasionally see some performance issues where the frame rate would drop significantly for a short while, but mentioning that that's a work-in-progress build. The game doesn't come out until December. But also mentioned that as a current-gen only game, it's only taking advantage of ray tracing. During the Q&A session, the technical director clarified that there is actually no non-ray tracing mode similar to the recent Spider-Man 2. Now, does that mean, are they talking about consoles? Are they talking about consoles not having a non-ray tracing mode? Because if we look at the PC requirements, the minimum GPUs here do not have hardware accelerated ray tracing. Now, there is software-based ray tracing. Things like Unreal Engine's Lumen and other games do a similar thing. I believe Alan Wake 2 has its own type of software-based ray tracing going on in it for its global illumination. And then, this is Ubisoft's Snowdrop engine. Are even the minimum settings, using global illumination? It's like a software-based ray tracing ? Because again, they said the technical director said there is no non-RT mode, but again, maybe they're talking about on consoles. So I'm not quite sure what they mean by that, and which of these settings are using what levels of ray tracing. This is an AMD-sponsored title where we generally don't see super heavy ray tracing implementations, but maybe that's not the case. Also, despite being an AMD-sponsored title, this will feature Intel's XeSS and NVIDIA's DLSS. But again, question mark of will it be DLSS frame generation? I'm not sure on that mode, but we will get FSR3 frame generation day one. Again, ultra-wide support, so there is a lot of good stuff to be on the case here. So overall, that's what you're going to need. Again, you could use the Tech PowerUp GPU database to see kind of where your GPU falls in relation to these. And again, what are your guys' thoughts on basically, it seems like game developers are kind of assuming upscalers will be enabled, and that's where a lot of your performance scalability comes from. If this is the trend moving forward, I really want to see AMD improve their upscaling, right? They have their FSR3 frame generation, but that did not really do anything to improve the upscaling quality. And if games are really going to be, dependent on upscaling for performance, I'd really like to see AMD get a better upscaler out there that better competes with DLSS, especially when used at resolutions like 1080p and at more aggressive settings. What are you guys' thoughts on these system requirements and those general thoughts about PC gaming in general? Reliance on upscalers, all of that. I'm excited to get another game to test out FSR3 frame generation. I hope it has DLSS 3 frame generation to get another side-by-side comparison of those technologies. And I hope all of you have an excellent day. And don't forget to check out World of Warships by following the link in the pinned comment and video description.